very happy to have here Pam. Not just because is a great woman, a wonderful feminist, and a good, marvelous friends, but also because she's a very well-known researcher in gender-related violence within the university. In fact, she was the coordinator of the URV REAT project, USV REAT project, sorry, and she has been working for many here in this topic. She will talk more about that, so I just do say her actual position. She is professor of children, youth and community in the Department of Social Work, Care and Community in the School of Social Science at Nottingham Trent University, UK. She is now actively involved in many research projects, and she have a lot of books. For example, she co-authored Sociology and New Materialism with Fox, and she also co-edited the Sage Handbook of Youth Social Work Practice with Fiona Cullen, Fusco, and Edwards. Another thing she wanted me to tell you is that she's studying Spanish, and next time she promised she will do the presentation in Spanish. Now I'm adding it, but thank you very much.
I'm very happy to continue my relationship with URV, Grady, UB, UAB. So very happy to be invited. Gracias, Barbara. Okay, I'll put some lessons from two large projects and two small projects to extract for today. And I'll do that by talking about the following four things. I'll talk about mapping, defining, analysing, and intervening. I've much to say about responding and intervening because that's where my projects have been, but that makes me see the importance of SeGReVUni and of a detailed project to map, of the detailed information. It's important to map the problem and to know what, where, who, and how in order to tackle it. We understand that this knowledge is power, and of course, before we can tackle it, we need to define. I'm going to suggest an analysis, a form of analysis for types of problem, types of intervention, especially types of intervention. And Barbara asked if I could say something about good practice in the UK, and I will present an example university, but I don't really know if it's good practice. I think it is, but I don't know, so I'm really interested in your opinion. We'll be very happy to hear what you think. Okay, so mapping first. Mapping is hard. Mapping and reporting are difficult because disclosure is difficult. And because disclosure is hard, people don't disclose. And the different reasons not to or to disclose belatedly, perhaps years later, relate to who people are, whether they feel they'll be believed, how credible a witness they think they are in other people's eyes, and how exposed they want to be or can be at that time. Okay, so because, as we see here, reporting is disclosing, which is exposing, as Alison Phipps showed. Disclosing requires certain conditions for our claim to be heard meaningfully, as Butler noted. So the politics and the psychology of disclosure are both really important. Okay. Yeah, and as Sarah Ahmed has written about, testifying is something traumatic. It can also be very traumatic itself. Okay, the additional problem of sexual harassment or sexual violence in universities is that it's a semi-closed community. The perpetrator possibly a member of the community too, with the particular problem of being expected to be in lectures, in classes together. And that's one that the universities argue is a reason they can't take action. The other particular problem, if it's staff-student harassment. Now that's been a big focus in the UK of campaigns, and some work, some good work, some really good work. But we also know that the majority of cases are peer abuse. Okay. But both, we have to be alert to both, of course. We understand a hierarchical organisation of a university as likely having people in positions of power and them likely staying in those positions of power, whatever incidents are reported. That's the real risk. There's a recent article by Anna Bull, this year, on catalysts and rationales for reporting staff sexual misconduct to universities. It's very good. Okay, so mapping is important, and the detail is really important. And the detail of the mapping, I have a few examples of how that was important. If we don't have the detail of the mapping, then the stereotypes remain in place, and our interventions are crude and possibly worse than nothing. So a small study of students in one university informed an intervention there in a larger study, the USV React, I'll talk about next. If we can really get into the detail of specific incidences of harassment or abuse or violence, we learn important things. For example, in one university, in my old university, where all these interventions had been made, Great Night Out, Ask Angela, bar staff training, yes means yes, no means no posters, etc. Lots of things done. The bar culture was apparently improved, much better, but we realised only through the detailed survey of students that it was the smoking area that was particularly risky. It was a particular area, non-surveillant, semi-private, and that was the risk spot. And we wouldn't have known that otherwise. Okay. Another detail was which staff. So in a famous case in the UK, it was the staff of the radical social sciences teaching who thought that they had they were feminists, they had rethought power, therefore their relationship with a student was not transgressive, it was radical in a productive sense. So that was a problem. And also the which of which students. So we find that in some particular student societies, sports clubs, there are initiation rites that are sexualizing and humiliating, but it's very particular to the culture in those clubs. So the detail here. Okay. And until we racialize the examples, until we have the details and racialize it, we can't see those patterns of power and those patterns of inequality and how they intersect. Every black woman in the Jennifer Hirsch's study, big study in Columbia University, every black woman who was interviewed disclosed incidences of sexual harassment on the university campus. So recent, everyone. Okay. This is the small mapping exercise we did at Brunel. It was with a master's student, Kahindi Davies, asking students who they would disclose to. And this was really valuable because the assumption that student services or the welfare staff wasn't true. So it was almost equal. The three big groups are student welfare, okay, that's the expected one, the tallest bar, but also personal tutor. So academic staff who at the time had no training. So that's what the USV project was. Academic staff, personal tutors, and also students' union representatives. So they are students in officer roles. So they may have had no training. So they were the three important groups to train. And it showed us that the university's protocol, the care pathway, had to have different points of entry. Couldn't assume only the welfare service. It needed that breadth. Okay. So, you're a very kind audience. I've managed to speak for 5 slides without defining my object, and you haven't heckled me. So, I think that's very kind. So, thank you. And I've given examples so far of majority gendering. So, male perpetrator, female victim survivor. But the issue of gender and sexual violence, of course, doesn't reduce to violence against women. And that's something that we felt very strongly from the start. So, for instance, 41% of trans folk in the last year have experienced abuse of hate crime or an instance about their gender identity. And we know that bisexual women are more likely to experience rape than heterosexual or lesbian women. That's a quite stark finding. And we know that the amount of sexual violence that men experience is high, much higher than is recognised and much higher than is disclosed, for the problems of disclosure and help seeking and the myth of male invulnerability. So this led to us wanting an inclusive approach, an approach that really was intersectional and applied our theory on intersectionality, and that was non-judgmental, of course, so that all victims, survivors would be recognised and supported. And we wanted to think not just about class, race, age, ability, sexuality, but also popularity, status, popularity in that really subtle way that, yeah, captain of the sport, of the football team, okay. And the we here includes Barbara Biglia and her colleagues. So this may be something you've heard about before. These two projects do incorporate work by Barbara. Okay, so the first of the two large projects, the GAP work project, was to create training for professionals to intervene on gender-related violence in their work with young people, so generic, so no disclosure needed. So it was preventative, it was educational. And it expanded the definition of gender-based violence into gender-related violence in order to problematize the gender order as a whole, and really wanted to work with a more political definition of violence than the World Health Organization's intentional use of physical force, which, although it says it's going to talk about political violence and community violence, then talks about a perpetrator. So it doesn't really. Okay, and we wanted it to be to cover sexist, sexualizing, or norm-driven bullying, whoever, harassment or violence, whoever is targeted. So that incorporating norm criticality was important. Now, this project has a legacy of training resources, which I hope are accessible. They're in English, Spanish, Catalan, and other languages too, and Serbian, Hungarian, and Italian. So I do hope they can be used still and adapted to situations. Okay, the definition we used did seem to help. In the Italian context, it allowed the first collaboration between a Pride, Torino Pride, a Pride organisation, and sexual violence, domestic abuse, feminist network of refugees. It was the first collaboration for them. In the UK, it was helpful because it allowed youth workers and social workers to recognise that they were problematising the violence out there, but the violence in their own departments they weren't seeing. So that was homophobic attitudes, that wasn't being named. Yeah, racism internally, yeah. Or lyrics of music to talk about. They might problematise the young people's violence, but not the police violence. They weren't thinking about police machismo. Okay, in Ireland, a bit less complicated. They stopped using GRV, gender-related violence, and used gender-based violence and anti-LGBT violence. That suited their context better. And I won't speak for the Catalan experience. I'll let Barbara cover that if and when she wants to. Okay, yeah, some of the resources that remain, I hope, are still useful. Okay, so the second and the largest project, over €1 million of EU co-funding, was to support student survivors in universities. So student survivors of sexual violence, so a bit more specific, although we still liked the gender-related violence breadth and the framing. This was a bit more specifically focused. Its emphasis was on anyone disclosing, being heard respectfully, preventative as well as responsive, but primarily responsive. And thinking intersectionally about students and staff, but also about the different contexts. So again, each different partner and each different university in region created its own intervention. Okay, the partners are on here. I'm going to move down. The training programs were based on international literature about best practice and an audit of policies, and these are downloadable still. They were piloted in the different regions, and we've got the training materials for the different regions, which we hope are usable, that universities can take these materials, adapt them to their particular protocols or reporting procedures or support organisations and use them. And I'm very happy to help people help universities identify which one might be the most relevant for their context or their university, and to try to support them in implementing it. And of course to help study what happens. Very interested in those. Okay. Here are the training programs, and I'm missing a Serbian and a Hungarian and a Latvian flag from there. Okay. We made recommendations for UK universities, but I'll focus here on the recommendations for the whole international recommendations. Okay, we recommended, of course, that the training should be rolled out for staff, that all staff, all front-line staff, so academic and professional services, should have the training on disclosure response, how to respond appropriately, what services are there to support. Whether or not it's mandatory, we thought, is a difficult decision only made in context. In my university, I want it to be mandatory because okay, so we can all make that decision about whether we should force people to talk about force. Wanting to make sure the recognition of the wide range of types of violence and harassment, recognising that it needed to be linked to institutional values. So this is where we'll start to talk about the culture change and organisational culture that Tanya and Esther raised at the start. That we need to keep an eye on staff and student abuse. We need to keep strong links with feminist women's organisations and sexual violence and sexual health services. That staff are needed, specialist sexual violence support units within universities. And yeah, that can do, and more research. The analysis, the types of intervention we can think about by this kind of schema. Okay, so the first at the left I've called care. These might be a university or a school or an organisation looking after its student, perhaps a student who's experienced violence, or perhaps any students preventatively, but it's still an individual focused thing. Probably it's retrospective, it's post hoc. Probably, and probably it's individual focused. And if you can see the eyes of the emoji, they're dollars. So probably this is to make sure that student stays and doesn't leave the university. So it's about retention, which is about money and reputation. So it's kind of self-interested. The middle area might be more progressive. It might have really good equalities information. It might be EDI, equalities, diversity, inclusion. It might be, to some sense, proactive because it's talking about equalities. So good, really good. But only thinking about, and it might also address things like poverty and stigma and those things about captain of the team, those dynamics. But it's still only concerned for its members. It's within the university only. So much better, but just within the university. And the third, final and best option is concern with social justice, even if the people of concern and not all those issues are not inside the university. So wanting to think about the university as somewhere that needs a just campus culture, not just for the students who make it to university, that isn't everybody, for all, for the society. So seeing universities as a site of social change. That's the bolder vision for the university that I want to, that I hope for. Okay. Now, the context, the university context. Disclosure has to be understood in context of the class, the discipline, even the et cetera, but then universities in the sector. So the university or the higher education sector. We need to understand this. And this context is capitalist, this context is neoliberal, this context is legalistic and individualistic. And we need to think about that. And I think it's even more strongly in the UK than here, and even more strongly in the US than in the UK, maybe. So we see market conditions that produce universities that are mostly just care about their reputation. Yeah, familiar? Mostly just care about their reputation more than student well-being. We see a silencing of complaints, but then disclosure on social media. So a silencing within the university. And there are reasons for that, I can understand. Students may want to keep that boundary. Then we also can see there are bigger educational and sexual similar modes of auditing and assessment that hierarchicalize and assign value. So, as Alison Phipps wrote, she said, we have university league tables, we have module evaluation forms, we've found sex charts in university residences. They're all the same. They're hierarchies of performance, which are often hierarchies of masculinity at national or institutional or at individual body experience levels. So it's not surprising when we have rate your uni and we have rate your lecturer, rate your module, that we then have rate your shag on the walls. Okay. Now, even more, this is why I'm wearing my sticker on my fading sticker on my badge. Even more, the wider context for universities. So in the UK currently, the university sector is not happy. This is not a happy sector. There are 4 campaigns that we are on strike. My union, which is the biggest education union in Europe, they tell us, is on strike over 4 issues. It's pay and conditions, but it's casualisation. And it's because there are thousands of lecturers on 0-hour contracts. Thousands. Yeah, they don't know if and when. So, and a gender pay gap and a race pay gap. And pensions. Okay, so there are a lot of problems. This is not a sector that is looking after its staff, let alone looking after its students. Oh, it's looking after its vice chancellors. Beg your pardon. Their pay is equivalent to a pensions increase of 2% for all staff, or something crazy. That might not be the exact figure. Okay. Now, a PhD that I was lucky enough to examine studied the responses of 10 universities in the UK and 10 universities in the US and compared them. It's a great PhD. This is Erin Shannon, and it was at York last year. Okay, and she finds that both UK and US universities, in both cases, universities prioritised their reputation over student well-being, over the well-being of student survivors in particular. And in both cases, they had a decentralized, in both country cases, they had a decentralized structure that made it really difficult to report and really difficult to follow through, and that stopped it being survivor-centred, the decentralized structure of the university and of the complaints process. She concluded that both universities in the UK and US, in her sample, prioritised protecting their reputations over the well-being of student survivors, and she identified 3 mechanisms that are on here by which they did it. The first, so in the US, differently handled. So in the US, handled by equalities legislation. In the UK, handled by well-being, welfare, really. So very differently treated. I mean, also covered by equalities legislation if students are leaving university. So equalities is an option, but there's a closer, stronger framing now also in welfare, student welfare in the UK. But the 3 different processes she points to, I've got a point. Institutional the power. It's wonderful. Yes. Institutional airbrushing, which Alison Phipps talks about, which is the hiding incidents, not talking about them, keeping them quiet, making students or staff sign non-disclosure agreements, making them sign that they won't talk to the press, they won't talk to the newspapers. That's a problem. Institutional airbrushing, so silencing. Edelman talks about symbolic structures. These were big in the US universities. This is where there's a committee that is called the Committee for Dealing with Complaints of Sexual Violence or something. It's a committee or a forum that's exactly perfect, that prevents a legal case against the university because the university can show it's responsible and it has created the structure. But it doesn't mean it's effective. Doesn't mean it meets more than once a year. It doesn't mean it gets through its business. So the symbolic structures, which are sort of a decoy, really, they're just for legal protection of the university. And then for the UK, more dominant was institutional embellishment. And institutional embellishment was an active response. It was, okay, we'll create a unit or campaign, a department in professional services. It was a response to be seen, so it was, it had some promise, but it was to be seen to be acting. So it might not be effective, but it might be owning the reputation, saying, yes, this is a problem, and we're going to do something about it. Here, look what we do. Okay. So, each reflects a performative university culture, and universities attempting to improve reputation issues. They don't make it a safer place for students necessarily, and they aren't survivor-centric. Okay. I can leave that there, I think, really. Yeah. Awesome. So, intervening. So I'm on to the fourth theme now of intervening. So we can have lots of poster so intervening in the immediate sense, we have things like the bystander intervention, bystander initiative. There's some really good work where universities made it compulsory for students to do 8-hour training at the start of their degree that was about kind of a citizenship, university citizenship. This is how you support your colleagues. This is where you go for support. This is how you intervene. Okay, so that's gone well, but a few years ago that was going well. Now it's gone a bit quiet. Okay, more specific and very common and very popular and very easy to do. So maybe all UK universities have done poster campaigns. There are lots of good poster campaigns, including the no means no in bars. No means no, yes means yes, or the Ask Angela. That's the one where bar staff, if you go to a bar and they say, yeah, what do you want? And you say, I want to speak to Angela, they know you need to get out of a situation and they'll let you behind the bar, get you a taxi, a woman taxi, or whatever you need. So these are very common. These are quick interventions. This kind of intervention is one from a previous project I had, but this is a team anti-homophobia intervention. It was put in all the sports centres in Finland. I recommend it to schools, and they sometimes put it up all around school, especially sports changing areas. Okay, it's just a nice, simple, a very immediate intervention, I think. So they're in the university, they're in amongst student culture intervention. So that is kind of problematizing student culture and intervening there. This is problematizing staff culture, senior staff culture. So this project by Alison Phipps and Liz MacDonald was basically talking about values with vice-chancellors and senior executives in universities, the senior team, and doing a workshop with them, making them talk about their core values and what it really was. And they're talking about education and equality and fairness and care. So that was, that's a profound intervention. And I don't know, I tried it at my university, even though I had this €1 million and I couldn't get the ear of my vice-chancellor. No time. Of course, yeah, we know that. Yeah, we know that. We do that, but no time. Okay. Wider than the universities, the kind of interventions in public. So we have some good anti-hate crime posters on the tube. London Transport does really good anti-hate crime, really good pride, even painting trains. This is a nice one. It's quite a new campaign, and it's a government campaign about what would you do if you think a woman is being sexually harassed, what would you do? And it has the people on the bus and their ideas, and they say they'd ask the driver for help, or they'll ask is she okay, or they'll interrupt and ask what the next bus stop is, or how to get somewhere to start a different conversation. So it's good. The other intervention that I want to talk about in the university is the one that I'm most involved in, and I'm trying to research now, and I'm trying to do now. And it's about consent education for students. Now, Barbara asking what I can represent, what I think might be good practice at universities. And the next few slides are about my own university. But part of the reason I went to that university is I could see that they were proactive on sexual violence handling. They had already made a video, and they had a big unit, a six-people unit of support around sexual violence. So I was quite impressed, and I was interested, and and they offered me a professorship, so I went. So we here run as mandatory for all first-year undergraduates a consent education workshop, 90 minutes. Students get sent invitations, and they keep getting invitations until they've attended and they are registered as having attended. So in that sense, it's mandatory. And there's a little panic about the end of the year, when they panic that some who have been avoiding it, they think they're not going to pass their course. And we don't actually have that power, but there's the sort of rumour. And if somebody wants to opt out because they think it'll be too triggering, they can do that. They can email and say, don't keep sending me these, I'm not coming. Okay, the lead of the team thinks that what NTU does is best practice. She thinks it's gold star on prevention, which is the consent education. And she thinks it's silver medal on response. So the response is through this unit. So this is about the consent education program. And the video it's the cup of tea video made with a real person. So still the problems of the cup of tea, but it's a good conversation piece. It works. We can watch it if you want to at any point. And we use Mentimeter to do vignettes. Is this consent? Is this not consent? We do myth busting. We do some facts and some legal framing, some language to use, and support services, of course. We talk about support services, and we make them then put their phones away, then take it out and take a picture of the support services. Okay. So it's rolled out to lots of staff. Students, 90% of students say they think it's good and they want their friends all to see it. So that's quite good. And we can see that 92% of them feel more confident in receiving consent, in dealing with consent in personal situations. So it seems good. There was an award for the university from the Times Higher. And I think 6 staff is interesting. We're a very big university, 33,000 students. 6 staff I thought was big. I now hear another university has 20 staff and is half the size. Okay. So, I've talked about that, and you can see that what I want is a range of interventions that are both in the student culture, in the university. They are both a care pathway for individuals who've experienced victimization, and public and wider campaigns about justice. This book is about the racialization and the individualization in the Me Too movement. Okay, last slide. So here are resources for really applying intersectionality. And I've put a few different resources here. This one is the training resource. This one is particularly addressed to Islam and to Islamic survivors. And these are the principles that we want: equality in our policy, in our practice, and in the university culture. And we want criticality of the power dynamics and the status hierarchies in the universities across all levels, across staff, students, among staff, as well as among students. Okay, so I'll stop there. Okay, so gracias, muchas gracias, gracias, and there's my references.
Thank you very much, Pam, for your wonderful presentation. And I think it's, oh, yes.
And I just meant to end on saying buona suerte to SeGReVUni, because none of these studies do mapping, and we need the mapping. So I wanted to say good luck. It's very important.
Thank you very much. I think your presentation perfectly engaged with the previous also political presentation and what does we need in the universities in now. No, sorry. I would like to know if there is any question or comments or reflection from the audience, or I will do myself questions.
Hi, well, my name's Victoria Massett. I'm actually a student here. I'm doing a master right now, but I teach in business schools.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered, this was so interesting for me, and that's why I'm here, because I teach in business schools. We don't have policies, we don't have protocols sometimes in schools that I've worked in. And I wondered, do you have any experience with business schools, whether they're related to a public university or not? Do you know much about this area in business schools?
I know one particular professor in a business school with an equalities expertise, and I can see that business management, the law, equalities was the strong lever there. It was complying with the Equalities Act and then making sure, so that seemed to be a big lever there. But surely there must be lots of good work on organisational culture and how much more effective, how much more resilient an organisation is if it has a kind culture, if it has a culture where it believes colleagues, whether they say the printer's not working or whatever they say. A culture of belief is sure. So I would imagine that's where it is. But I'd ask you where you think it is in organisation studies, because, so that PhD, Erin Shannon's PhD, is organisational studies. And there's many chapters that on that. So that is one source. She's publishing now.
Right. Well, I'll check it out. I mean, I guess that's one also reason I've come back to study as well. To my experience of work is here in Barcelona. It's quite limited in the schools that I've currently worked in. But from what I've read so far as well, this topic, because they're private business schools, they tend to move away from this type of topic. But it's something that I'm very interested in, and I think is absolutely vital whether the school is private or public.
I think one thing that you have to do in that context is to make sure that an increased number of disclosures is seen as a good thing, a safe place to disclose, not seen as a bad thing. And you have to try and make sure that logic is already there, I think. Otherwise, you start talking about it, and an increase in disclosures, and it's suppressed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Do you have another one?
Yes.
Doctora Kala?
Okay, but if I commit any mistake, please help me. I have two questions. One is because I think I was trying to... Just a moment. Sorry.
They are going to record my English. Okay.
Don't worry, they already record mine. So.
One is about, you say something like legalist context or contexto legalista. Yeah?
Legal, yes. Yeah.
And I think I tried to make notes and I lost something. So if you can't repeat the concept for me, I will appreciate it, because I understand how it means, but not in your research or maybe how you do it.
Thank you. Perfect opportunity. Yes, the UK, a bit less than the US, but following, it has the human rights framework ends up being applied in an individualist way. So that an individual who knows their rights can claim their rights. An individual who's really trodden down is much less likely to be able to access, or to be able to redress legal problems. And it just frames it very the law frames it individualistically. So as an anarchist feminist, as an abolitionist feminist, I want to think much more about okay, the law is one tool, but it's not the end of the story, and it's not enough on its own. And we can't just have individual perpetrator responses against individual perpetrators. We need to address the culture, as we've been talking about, and we need to address the society that fetishizes power. You know, there's all kinds of things that are much, much broader than this issue, or broader than any particular individual in it. So the legalistic as the necessary but minimum. And yeah. Oh, you had two. You said you had two.
I have another one, but I'm not sure if I can. Yes, it's on. Okay, perfect.
And the other one is about, because always when I hear about campaigns, or when I lived that campaigns in my university when I was a student, I always think in the responses, no? Because I'm not sure in this context, but here in Spain, I feel that these campaigns usually makes an impact just in the people who are a little bit conscious or have a political conscious, no? Barbara and I was in a project this year, and we had the experience with when the project tried to intervene in schools with teenagers, and when the project was, the results were good, etc. No, but when we talked with the facilitators, we talked with the people who tried to intervene with these students. No, they told us things super hardcore. Like after we start to talk about gender violence, they put on fire a bin in a class. No, like these kind of responses. No, so or in my university, when you went to a support center, or to in my faculty we had something that is called puntos violetas, like purple points, in order to support the students. Usually, or my feeling is that normally just go feminists. Sorry, my English is just, my brain can't do it anymore, but yeah, I'm not sure if, and I want to know if you have these experiences, and if you have this kind of anti-feminism responses or anything, if you did something. I'm just curious, maybe it didn't happen, but...
So I've done a lot of the consent education training because my area was sex education, and I was already doing it, and it's so close to my research. I've been very keen to do, and I wanted the university to do them. I've done a lot, and I don't have a teaching load. So I've done a lot of them. So I've got quite a lot of experience, and we feedback from a student group every time. The trainer debriefs to the organiser, but also there's the Mentimeter, and there's a feedback form, and we don't let them leave the room till they've done a quick online feedback form. So we always have something to put against our feeling of how it went. And I've had only I've had two sessions that I thought were resistant. And in actual fact, the one that I thought was most resistant wasn't. What it was it's supposed to be 20 people, and it was the end of term last June, and it was 70 people in a room. So not a context for doing, not ideal. And worse than that, the room was round tables, so they would be facing each other, not facing me. So great for discussion. And this has got some table discussion, but I wanted them facing me. And there was a couple of tables of young men at the back who knew each other, and so had lots of comments, had lots to say. So I was perceiving it as hostile and as pushback, but I went and stood near them, put them under super surveillance, and what they were saying was was focused, relevant, on message, humourful but relevant. They were just loud. It was the end of term. It was hot. You know, they were just loud. That's all. And their comments were engaged. So I was really glad I went, and I'd done a few of those. Would this table like to share their ideas? They're very noisy, like in thinking they were being naughty, but they weren't. Okay, so that was good. That was my expectation of hostility there. It wasn't true. In the other case, it was a bunch, almost always fantastic responses. I mean, I frame it, I feel like it's quite important to frame it as, I think these issues are so important that we can hear it twice. So I'm not insulting you. You know, this isn't an insult to you. This is to say, this is so important, let's think about it some more. If you hear it twice, fine. If you hear about your rights, if you hear about how to protect somebody else's rights twice, that's okay. That's better than not. And it's quite fast-paced, and it's complicated. You know, the vignettes are complex, so they do. I don't think it's patronising. I think it's quite a good programme. It's evolved a few times as well, and it was written with those students. And the scenarios are real scenarios from cases that have been handled by the department. So there's a kind of tightness of fit, really. There is also the power dynamic that I'm a lecturer. I'm a professor in a department in the university. Some of these, I think the social science students are the best. And I'm in their faculty, so maybe that's relevant. The social work students were brilliant, of course. They've come to be advocates in this situation, so of course they were great. Even though they are mature students, and to talk to them about their bodily consent practices could have been taken as insulting. But yeah, there's always a student facilitator and a staff facilitator. Maybe that helps a bit. Maybe. It stops it being staff to student kind of didactic. Maybe.
Thank you very much, Pam. Actually, I just want to make two precision before closing this, that the course Carla was talking about was made with teenagers. Mm-hmm. So we were reflecting about the black clash that there is in the new generation, and sometimes this resistance seems to be stronger than some years ago. Probably also because feminism is stronger, at least here, is what's happening in our context. And also want to make a little things that you say you are abolish feminist. I want to remember that is abolish of prison. So not, because in this context of debates here, that yes, you are not abolitionist of sexual work.
No.
That's what I just
anti-penal. Yeah.
Yes, that's. I just want to make this precision.
Yeah.
Anyhow.
Thank you.
I think you have give us a lot of inputs and a lot of very, very interesting material we can consult and we can continue to work on. And also I would like to remember that today is a very complex day for the timing. It's the 15th of December, and we were not able to have here people from the observatory because they have a meeting in the same day from the Cerca Vives all together discussing a very similar topic. So we want to thanks everybody, but especially you, Pam, from coming with car, not to make, with train, not to make carbon print in the environment. So, wow. Thank you very much.